The second 100 days. In 1933, the government needed to help the country rise from the fallen ashes of economy due to the Great Depression. The first 100 days were filled with the passing of many acts like the Emergency Baking Act. The second 100 days were created due to the not so high success rate that President Roosevelt was hoping for. Since the 1920s, the production and economy were low, and President Roosevelt took matters into his own hands and created the New Deal, which was involved with the first 100 days. It was so popular that he decided to create another deal. The deal following the first deal was the Second New Deal, which is also known as the Second 100 Days, and FDR was encouraged by his wife Eleanor Roosevelt. The new acts that were created during this time span was the Works Progress Administration, which was a relief agency that helped people construct roads, schools, and also airports. This was a really popular act during the time. The National Labor Relations Act of 1935 helped employees and also employers by protecting their rights. The Security Social Act of 1935 was directed for the general welfare to assure them more security. It was also created for the crippled people, including the blind and the very old. This act was one of the most successful, and it is still used in the United States to this day. Overall, the second 100 days provided America with more acts to ensure the safety of Americans so they could have a cushion with their lives. The growth of the second 100 days helped America after the depressing economy and production that was caused in the 1920s due to the stock market. If that wasn't enough information, this video should clear things up.
Despite his outspoken critics, FDR knew the economy had improved, but not as much as he'd hoped for. And so he launched, with the help of his humanitarian wife Eleanor, the Second New Deal. Mrs. Roosevelt traveled the country from coast to coast, seeing the poverty and suffering, urging her husband to provide even more help to the needy. She became a kindly symbol of hope for the downtrodden, who regarded her as a personal friend. Thousands of children wrote to her, asking for help. FDR convinced Congress to pass more legislation to spur the economy, including a second Agricultural Adjustment Act, rewarding farmers that practiced soil conservation and compensating farmers who cut production of soil-depleting crops like cotton and wheat. The Resettlement Administration loaned money to tenant farmers so they could buy their own land and established camps for migrant workers. The Second New Deal's most ambitious program was the WPA, the Works Progress Administration. The WPA created more than 8 million jobs from 1935 to 1943 for a great many unskilled workers and professionals. The WPA constructed 850 airports, built or repaired 650,000 miles of America's roads, sold more than 300 million articles of clothing for the needy, and erected 110,000 libraries, schools, and hospitals. Artists, authors, and musicians found work in the WPA too, painting murals on public buildings, writing, performing, and composing. A National Youth Administration was also created to provide aid and part-time employment for students in need. The Second New Deal also helped reform labor laws with the passage of the Wagner Act, which supported workers' rights to form unions, and the establishment of the National Labor Relations Board to prevent unfair labor practices. From 1933 to 1941, the number of union workers rose from 3 million to 8. Congress also passed the Fair Labor Standards Act, requiring minimum wages and maximum hours for workers. Despite the administration's pro-labor policies, strikes were prevalent and often led to violence. On Memorial Day 1937, 10 people lost their lives at the Republic Steel Strike in Chicago. Perhaps the most important legacy of the Second New Deal was the Social Security Act of 1935. For the first time, Americans over 65 years of age and their spouses had old age insurance. Jobless workers got unemployment compensation, and families with dependent children and the disabled received aid. In 1935, only about 30% of American farms had electricity, so Congress, with Roosevelt's urging, set up the Rural Electrification Administration. 10 years later, 45% of rural America had electric power. With widespread support from organized labor, minorities, and the public at large, FDR was re-elected as president in 1936. His victory marked the first time most African Americans voted for a Democratic Party candidate. With Eleanor Roosevelt's prompting, Roosevelt appointed the first female ambassador and several women federal judges. Frances Perkins became the first female Secretary of Labor, and Mary McLeod Bethune was appointed head of the Office of Minority Affairs in the National Youth Administration, becoming the first African American woman to head a federal agency. Meanwhile, Mrs. Roosevelt defied the Daughters of the American Revolution, publicly resigning her membership when the DAR refused to let Marian Anderson sing in Washington, D.C.'s Constitution Hall because of her color. Instead, Eleanor Roosevelt arranged for the concert to be held on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial.
Overall, the Second New Deal created a chain reaction and led to much change in America. Thank you for watching.